Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room. Hope you're doing well. In this video, I am going to tackle the question of how to spot a non-INFJ. Because there's a few reasons why I want to make this video. The first reason is it's not in any particular order, but the first that comes to mind is that my video how to spot an INFJ is a video that seems to have been very useful to people. It's actually one of my most successful videos to date. I published it many months ago, and to this day there are like hundreds of people every day that check it out. So I figured maybe how to spot a non-INFJ could also be a useful video. And next to that, the other reason that I want to make this video is because usually how to spot a non-INFJ is obviously in relation to someone who claims to be an INFJ. But there is something more to this, which is that usually people who are mean to INFJs on YouTube, and there are many people who are not nice to INFJs on YouTube by their behavior, whether that behavior be downvoting their videos without explaining why for no reason, just saying mean things, and sometimes even calling them out for not being INFJ. There's so many genuine INFJs who are like called out for not being INFJs by other INFJs that are actually not INFJs. And I think it can be very upsetting for an INFJ to have their identity called into question. And nothing is more obscene and heinous to me than when that happens and the INFJ person's upset as a result of words of a person who can actually be quite easily called out as not being an INFJ. And from the moment that this person's called out, I think that can have a therapeutic effect for the person who was the victim of this accusation or of this negative or toxic behavior. Because the person who was upset might say to themselves, well, okay, I was assaulted. Well, maybe assaulted is a bit strong, but I was treated meanly by a person. I had my identity called into question by that person. But in fact, the sort of position of authority that person was claiming for themselves is now dismantled. Therefore, I do not really give credit to the person anymore. Therefore, I'm no longer upset. So that's kind of the idea why I want to make this video, because I just find that there is like almost something that people do for sport, which is to call into question the identity of INFJs. And I just do not like this. I do not like this at all. Because I know that being INFJ is to be a sensitive, gentle soul who generally speaking wants to do good in the world, and there's no reason why they should be the targets of these things. Okay, so here are my observations on this. In fact, I think that the majority of the people who have that behavior, who say, oh, you're an unhealthy INFJ, or who downvote you, or who say that you're not an INFJ, the vast majority of the time in my experience, they have actually been non-INFJ claiming to be INFJs, okay? So here is how I would just give you some very, very practical, function-based, practical tips in case that happens to you, to identify that the person actually is not an INFJ, okay? So when someone comments, when someone downvotes you, that can mean anything, okay? But when someone has a systematic behavior of doing that and of being sort of mean to you or to people that you are close to, if a person is kind of cold and critical and takes a stance of authority vis-a-vis you, what this suggests is an absence of FEUs, right? And you'll be very surprised because a lot of the people who claim to be INFJs either do not use FE or they use it in an inferior spot. So what happens often is that those people tend to be ISTPs. That's my impression. There's one guy on YouTube who's an ISTP who has called out a lot of INFJs, and there are people in the comments to INFJ in the INFJ videos a lot of the time who seem to be ISTPs. They have the TI sort of. They have a certain. I mean, I'm not saying that they're super healthy ISTPs. They're probably ISTPs that loop NI and TI and NI in such a way that they might think that they are NI dominants and TI tertiaries. Because as you know, or as you maybe know, the ISTP and the INFJ do not have any function that distinguishes them. Like they have the same function used, except not in the same order. So the INFJ is NIFE-TISE, the ISTP is TISE, NIFE. And it suffices that an ISTP loops NI and TI, has strong enough NI. They might think that they are INFJs, and they will tend to overly rely on, and this is something that you may have noticed, they will tend to rely on a very rigid, pre-established framework according to which they judge whether you're INFJ or not, which is the TI, and they will base their observations mostly on things that they observe in what you're doing, in your facial expressions, in words that you say, very superficial stuff, which is based on the SE that they utilize. They utilize way more than the NI, contrary to what they think. But they have a sense of using NI, which makes them think that they're NI dominants. Now, if you ever come across someone who is not super friendly, who's come across quite judgmental, and bases his views and decisions of your type based on mostly how you appear in a video, without paying deep attention to the content of what you're saying or to the subtlest textures of how you're coming across, that's use of SE, and that's probably an ISTP at work. And there seems to be a lot of what I have to imagine are unhealthy ISTPs who think they're INFJs and who seem to make it a bit of a profession of calling out INFJs for not being INFJs, or to just be unpleasant generally to INFJs. So be careful, because that can happen a lot of the time, and that's quite a useful way to figure out whether a person is INFJ or not. Do they use FE? Because an INFJ, even an unhealthy INFJ, is going to kind of use FE in a lot of ways. An unhealthy INFJ is not going to use FE maybe in the same way as a healthy INFJ. They're going to use FE to manipulate, probably. But being able to manipulate, like a lot of unhealthy INFJs do, suggests still being quite skilled at using FE, you see? Which means being smooth, being friendly. If you encounter non-smoothness, unfriendliness, criticism that's quite frank and direct and devoid of this tact, you're not dealing with an INFJ. This person is masquerading as an INFJ, and that's enough for you to know that, okay? Keep this in mind, because this can be quite useful when you encounter these people. Now, I think that this is the main way that you can identify that someone is not an INFJ, is do they use FE or not? Even someone who has a repressed FE and is INFJ is still going to use FE quite well compared to a person who doesn't use FE, or who uses it in the tertiary or inferior spot, or else is an FI user. A lot of the ways in which we can distinguish an INFP from an INFJ is whether the person is the INF, the person is using FI, which comes across as being more private, less into manipulating, moving across different communities, changing personality a little bit to adapt themselves to the audience. INFPs do not adapt themselves as much, and they're more private and don't express their feelings as easily. So this is more indicative of FI. But sometimes the person masquerading as an INFJ is not an FI user. They are an FE user, except not an auxiliary FE user, because there's something very specific about a dominant FE or an auxiliary FE is the tact. They have tact. They are friendly. They tend to be. And even when they repress it, they will still come across as that. Maybe a little bit less, but they will still come across as that. So that's the thing. FE versus FI. FE versus TI. That is, an INFJ will be FETI, but a lot of people who pretend to be INFJ are not FETI in that order. They're TI-FE. Sometimes TI dominant and FE inferior. So keep an eye out for that. To keep an eye out for specifically unhealthy ISTPs. I think they're quite common. And maybe to finish with this, I would suggest that you try to pay attention whether the person is an NI user. Sometimes it's clear that the person is an NE user, and this you can easily see if you're having an exchange with someone and you notice that the person tends to be a little scattered, tends to kind of go everywhere, tends to not be super focused on what they're saying, and tends to sometimes very creatively, but still seems to be going in a bunch of different directions. INFJs that don't go in a bunch of different directions like this, they're more technically they're more intuitive than a lot of NE users who are only auxiliary NE, but their intuition is a converging intuition. It's not a diverging intuition. It has its strength, just like the divergent forms of intuition have their strength. But you will notice, if you see that a person is kind of circling around, making a point, or going in a bunch of different directions, it's just not staying focused on something specifically. Even if you can be spacey about your focus, you will still remain on, on target. For example, I would consider myself to be a somewhat spacey focused person. Spacey focused INFJ. Spacey unfocused, not INFJ. Not spacey unfocused, not INFJ. Okay? So this is another important aspect. And I think that based on these little tips, you will be able to tell straight away pretty much whether the person is INFJ or not. And if you're being the target of that person who calls into question your INFJness or your channel or whatever, pretending to be INFJ, well, you know that the person is masquerading, and it is the other person that is completely lacking in credibility. And I hope that if that happens, you will feel better very quickly by having applied that little, any of those 3 or 4 little techniques that I wanted to provide you with here. Okay, so that was the advice I wanted to give you today, guys. Have a lovely day, and I will be talking to you soon. Ciao.